Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a really tricky question. In this huge global marketplace, what's the real difference between a brand we all respect and a total cautionary tale? We're going to dive into the complex, often confusing maze of international business ethics to figure that out. So let's get right to the heart of it. Here's the big question. Can companies that we genuinely like, the ones with great intentions and strong values, can they still end up making some really bad, ethically questionable choices? And look, the answer is a resounding yes. This isn't just some theory. Take a brand like Gucci. They have this detailed code of ethics, they've famously gone for free, they've got these huge green goals, and yet they still found themselves in the middle of a massive scandal over inhumane working conditions. It's just a perfect example of how even a company trying to do the right thing can get completely blindsided. Okay, so before we go any further, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What do we even mean by business ethics? Well, at its core, it's just the accepted principles of right and wrong that are supposed to guide how people in business behave. Think of it like the moral rulebook for the world of commerce. And when a business goes global, you tend to see these ethical challenges pop up over and over again in four main areas: how you treat your people, whether you're respecting basic human rights, what kind of impact you're having on the environment, and of course, how you deal with corruption. But here's what I find really fascinating. It's the why. Why do smart, totally capable managers sometimes make these decisions that just feel wrong? Let's try to unpack the real root causes behind these ethical stumbles. It's almost never just one thing. It's usually this toxic mix of these 6 factors. Yeah, it might start with one person's own moral code, but it gets way worse when you throw in a company culture that only cares about profits, or crazy, unrealistic goals that force people to cut corners, or leaders who just set a terrible example. So, if those are all the traps, how can managers build some kind of reliable moral compass to find their way through it all? Well, believe it or not, this is where centuries of philosophy actually give us some pretty practical tools for making better decisions. All right, let's start with a classic, utilitarianism. You can kind of think of this as a moral calculator. Basically, an action is good if it creates the best possible outcome for the most people. It is all about the final result, the consequences. But then, on the complete other side of the spectrum, you've got Kantian ethics. In this framework says, hold on, the consequences aren't what matters most. It's the principle behind the action. The core idea here is that people have inherent dignity. You can't just treat them as a tool to get what you want. And this slide just lays out that tension perfectly, right? Do you focus on the outcome of what you do, or do you stick to universal principles that respect people no matter what? It's a real dilemma. This is where you see that clash between what an action achieves versus what the action is in and of itself. Okay, so let's see how these big ideas started to evolve into more modern frameworks, ones that tried to create a kind of universal moral baseline, using concepts like fundamental rights and justice. This is where rights theories come in. They basically argue that every single person has fundamental rights and privileges that should apply everywhere, no matter the country or the culture. Things like the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights try to write this down to create that clear baseline. This quote, for example, sets a pretty non-negotiable standard for work and pay. And this leads us to this really cool thought experiment from the philosopher John Rawls. Ask yourself this. If you had to design the basic rules for society, but you had zero idea what your own position in it would be, you don't know if you'll be rich or poor, powerful or weak, what kind of system would you create to make sure it was fair for everyone? Rawls called this idea the veil of ignorance. The concept is you're making all the rules for how society works, but you're doing it from behind this veil where you don't know your race, your gender, your family background, nothing. It forces you to be completely impartial. And Rawls argued that from behind this veil, any rational person would agree on 2 basic principles. First, everybody should have the most basic liberty possible, as long as it doesn't mess with anyone else's liberty. And second, having some inequality is only okay if the system that creates it also works to help out the person who's worst off. Okay, so I know that was some pretty heavy theory, but it's powerful stuff. The big question now is, how does a company actually take these ideas and turn them into a practical playbook that a manager can use day to day? Well, a great starting point is this idea of corporate social responsibility, or CSR. Really, all it means is that businesses have to think about the social fallout of their actions. The goal is to make choices that are good for the bank account and good for society. And here it is, a super practical 5-step framework to actually do this. Step 1. Figure out who this decision affects. 2. Judge the ethics of it using those tools we talked about. 3. Make a real commitment to put ethics first. 4. Actually do the ethical thing. And 5, and this is the one people always forget, go back and audit your decision. See what happened and learn from it. Ultimately, the end goal here is to build what we call sustainable strategies. This is the sweet spot where good ethics and good business are the exact same thing. It means you're profitable, but you're not wrecking the environment, and you're being socially responsible. Profit and principles start feeding each other. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. In this crazy, hyper-connected world where a company's reputation can be made or broken overnight, are the old rules changing? Is it possible that doing good isn't just a nice little extra anymore, but it's actually the only real way to do well in the long run? Something to think about.